Hello, everybody. This is Olga at Albalonga Translation Company, and we are pleased to tell you that we decided to have a series of interviews with some very important people who play an important part in the translation industry, and with some end clients, as well as some translators and different other people who all take part in the process called translation and localization. And our first guest today is Jost Zetzsche. Jost, hi. Thank you so much. You woke up so early to just meet us and talk to us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
For those who don't know Jost yet, Jost is an ATA accredited English to German translator, a consultant in the field of localization and translation, and a writer. Jost writes on technical solutions for translators, or for not just for translators, right?
No, I mean the technical stuff that I'm writing is mostly geared towards translators or translation professionals, but the recent Found in Translation book, that was not primarily geared towards translators.
Oh, yeah. I forgot to say that you are an author of 2 books, and both books are very popular, right? One is A Translator's Toolbox, a computer primer for translators. And the second one is actually the one you meant, right? It's Found in Translation.
Right, yes.
Amazing book.
Thank you.
Well, Jost, from that book, I have an impression that you are completely fascinated with translation and localization. How did that fascination start? How did you get into the industry?
Well, like many of us, it was kind of a roundabout way for me. My background actually is in Chinese. I studied Sinology or Chinese studies in Germany and spent some time in China. And then at a certain point, I focused on Chinese translation as a field of study. So I wrote my PhD thesis on the history of Chinese Bible translation, which in some way has very little to do with what we do today, because what we do in the translation and localization industry is very short-lived and, very quick. Everything has to happen overnight, sort of. And the Chinese Bible translation took a couple of 100 years to be finished. So it's from that sense, it's the opposite kind of. But it taught me a lot about translation principles, and it gave me a certain grounding, I think, as far as what translation quality is and how to approach translation in general. So that's after I finished my PhD, I moved to America. And I first wanted to continue with the academic path, but then I started to work for a translation company, and then after a couple of years made myself independent, and I've been independent ever since.
Wow, so that's amazing. First of all, Chinese Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm shocked. And really, how long did that take you?
Well, the thesis itself took me. Well, I didn't translate the Bible, right? I wrote the history of Bible translation, and I that took me about maybe 5 or 6 years to write that, and it's a really interesting history. So the most important word in the Bible, the word for the translation for God, they started to argue on that in 1807, and they still haven't found a solution today. How is that for a good terminology work to work on one term for more than 200 years, and they do have a solution. Of course, they have a word for God in Chinese, but they have 2 different words, or 3 different words, if you will, and sell 3 different Bibles for the different groups that want that particular term for God. So,
Wow.
So that's interesting. I mean, that's that. And of course there's many other stories that are interesting as well, but that in itself is kind of a mind-boggling example of how, of how important terminology work for one thing is, and how serious terminology work can be. That people who know what they're doing and who are very serious about the work can disagree very, very heartily and very, very strongly about something, and to the point that they actually have different solutions, and they all work, of course, but that's just the way it works.
Yeah, that's amazing. But now you are more engaged in the, all the different technical solutions, right?
I am, yeah.
Translators, for localizers. And, as you know, some translators treat new solutions and software as their worst enemies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was one of them, while others embrace them. So what's your opinion on the role of the technology in the translation and localization process?
Mm-hmm. Well, as you know, and most everyone who's listening to this probably knows, it does play an important role. I think that we've actually come a long way. We, if I compare us to, and when I say us, I mean translators in general, when I compare us to the folks of 15 or 20 years ago, we do accept technology as something that we have to use, and many of us also welcome it as something that is a positive thing to use. The reason why I started to write about technology, and the reason I have a newsletter and wrote the book about it, was to help translators to accept technology more, and to sort of become sort of an evangelist for technology. And I still am in a way, I think, but what I've also come to realize just in the last few years is that what we call industry is in reality a very, very wide field with all kinds of different needs. And there is not one technological solution for everyone. And I know plenty of translators who make a very good living on what you and I would probably consider to be a very low-tech sort of in a very low-tech kind of way. And there's a place for those people as well. I think that if you work in certain areas where you work with certain kinds of texts, you are extremely well advised to use technology, and most translators know that. But there are other areas where you can go by with very minute kind of technology. So technology is important, and but to assume that technology is equally important for everyone, or that everyone needs a certain set of technology, I've sort of come away from that concept. I think that yes, technology is very important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I kind of see what you mean. I have the same opinion about it.
Mm-hmm.
I read quite a few blogs and journals that translators write and publish, and I see that very often colleagues who are more or less well established, maybe older in age, they don't really like technology that much, and they prefer not to use it, while the younger generation is generally more friendly towards it.
Right, and I think what you also see on blogs, etc., is that especially the translators who are more experienced and who are maybe into technology is often assume that their particular set of technology is sort of the right set of technology for translation, and sort of have this kind of a missionary zeal to say, I found a solution, and this is what everybody should use. And of course, I'm oversimplifying here, but there is that mindset sometimes, and that is not really helpful, I think. Technology also is, of course, moving on, right? I mean, we right now are looking at new technologies that will have an impact on some of us. Again, not on all of us, but on some of us. And we need to be able to, to not look at what we've achieved in the past with technology, but we also need, technology is by definition something that's moving on, is by definition something that is developing into new areas. And so we need to be brave and open enough to look into new areas as well, I think.
Yeah. And that's what you're doing with your Toolbox Journal, right?
I'm trying, yeah. I'm trying. I'm just as limited as anyone else is, but I'm trying to be as open as I can for new developments, and I'm trying to find out what the benefit or the drawback of those new developments might be, not for me personally, but for translators in general. I think some are clearly drawbacks, but others might not be, and so we need to look into what it actually means for us as a community, a very diverse community. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to talk to the developers of the various tools and technologies, and often try to talk to them very early on, so long before they actually publish the technology or release the technology, so that I try to have an input and try to maybe help them to steer the technology in the right direction. Well, into the direction that I think is right. And so that's really interesting. And it's sort of a role that has developed out of me writing about translation technology, that many developers actually do call me at an early point and ask for my opinion. And that's, I enjoy it, and I think it's helpful for them and hopefully helpful for the community as a whole.
Yeah. Well, I think it is very helpful. And as far as I know, you are the go-to person concerning many, many technical issues. And, when there are opinions discussed and everything, somebody would at some point refer to your opinion. I've noticed that in many discussions, and that's something, and that's good. What I have noticed also from your biography is that you have seen the translation process from different perspectives, right? You've been a translator. You've been a project manager too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you are kind of like supplying translation industry with, the software solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So you have kind of seen this whole process with the eyes of at least 3 different people. Well, a tricky question. Which of those roles do you like best, and why? And a less tricky question would be, how different are those views actually? How different do those 3 people see the translation process? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I think if I look at the roles of project manager versus translator, I would always prefer to be a translator. There's great project managers, and I have great respect for what they do. But so maybe I should start differently. What I did like about being a project manager, I love to work in many, many different languages. And I still do that today, as, I help companies sometimes with technical difficulties. And then that means also that I have to work in at least manage different languages. But the reason why I prefer to be a translator is that I love to work with language, and albeit sometimes it's a little frustrating to always translate the same kind of manuals over and over again. That's, we all know that as translators, but still I love to work with language, and that's the reason why so if somebody asks me what I am, the typical question when you meet somebody, I always say I'm a translator, and I say it with great pride. I think that sometimes that also is one other area that I feel really strongly about, that we sometimes, the famous answer, well, I'm just a translator, and I feel very strongly that that's a really inappropriate answer. I'm not just a translator, I'm a translator, and I'm proud of it. And because it's, as you and I and many others know, but I think that, especially young translators don't realize that it's really important to be a translator. And no matter what kind of stuff you're translating, you're playing a very important role. And I happen to be really proud of that role. And that's why I can, without reservation say that I'm a translator, and I'm proud to be a translator. I don't always enjoy it. There's always stuff that is boring, and I usually work on technical materials, and sometimes that's just really boring, but overall I really enjoy translating, and of course I try to do other things as well, such as writing about translation and technical solutions, and that's something I would always encourage, especially young translators, to also do, not exactly what I'm doing, but to do translation, but then maybe also look for something that is related to their work as translators, but gives them the thing that they can do when there is, for instance, not as many jobs coming in as they have time for, or if they really feel the need to do something else after fairly monotonous translation work on a manual for dental machines or whatever they do, what I'm saying? So, and of course, one area where, typically we have certain specialties as translators, we specialize in, certain fields, whatever that might be. And so it makes a lot of sense to take those specialties and develop other expertises aside from translation in those areas, and have that as maybe the field that you have a second leg to stand on. I'm not really saying that from an economical point of view, but from a peace of mind and just kind of a diversification point of view. I think that's something that I would really encourage translators to do.
I see. Yeah, I see what you mean. I have another question for you. What do you think about machine translation, especially the English-Russian language pair? What do you think is the future of machine translation in this language pair?
Well, I don't speak and read Russian, but I've been to a number of conferences in Russia and Ukraine in the last few years, and so I've spoken to a lot of people who have looked into English, Russian, and Russian English, and I think that very similar, in fact, to German, which also is not particularly well suited for machine translation in comparison to languages like, if you go from Portuguese to Spanish, that's, very well suited. Or if you go from English to Spanish, it's also well suited, or from English to Swedish. But languages that are morphologically rich, like Russian or German or others, those languages are much more difficult to translate with machine translation, or to have an accurate or an almost accurate translation with machine translation. So the threshold is much higher, I think, in our language combinations. I think there is, I think that we have made a mistake to look at machine translation from just one point of view. So far, we've looked at machine translation mostly from the post-editing point of view. So we look at machine translation as something that, where we get a suggestion from machine translation, and then as professional translators or post-editors or editors, we then are to correct that translation, or to post-edit that translation. And I think that's I think in some instances it might be the right way of using machine translation, especially if you have extremely well-trained machine translation engines for a specific purpose or a specific sort of text. But in other cases, that might not be the best way of using machine translation. And yet I think even in those cases, there might be ways to use machine translation appropriately by really weaving it into your translation process. So by you continuing to use whatever means you've had so far, which might be a translation memory, certainly might be a terminology database, might be, other things, but then have the machine translation possibly come as a productive new, element that helps you in your translation process. So some tools are now starting to use like an interactive kind of machine translation where you receive suggestions from machine translation engines as you translate that you can either completely ignore or you can accept. So you don't necessarily focus on the complete sentence or segment, but maybe just a short subsegment, maybe just 3 or 4 or 6 words that in your sentence that the machine translation might actually have right, and you can accept just those 3 or 4 or 5, 6 words, and or where you have processes by which you have matches from the translation memory, which is a database of your previous translation, and those matches might be fuzzy matches. So, matches with slight differences to the original sentence. And the machine translation comes and corrects those because it might know that term that is missing or that is incorrect or that phrase that is missing or incorrect. And so those are things that I think have a lot of potential for us. I've, like many of us, I've worked as a machine translation post editor, and to be honest, I didn't very much enjoy it. Some people really enjoy it. I think that's great. I didn't happen to enjoy it very much, maybe because the engine that I was working with was not particularly good, maybe because my language combination isn't as well suited as others. But I'm very excited about some opportunities that machine translation brings us. Again, in kind of a new way. And those examples that I just gave you, I think are just the tip of the iceberg. I think we need to look at creative ways of using machine translation, and to integrate that into our process. See, I think that's the difference, that we sometimes look at machine translation as the machine translations process where we just kind of play a little role. What I would like to see is our process, the translation process that is guided by the translator, who is just being given different tools to work with. And machine translation could potentially, depending on the language combination, depending on a whole bunch of things, could be one of those tools that might help you.
Wow, that's an amazing picture you just drew. It does make sense, at least to me, really, because I can also see where machine translation could be useful. So far, it's very far from being ideal, of course. And even from being good in some cases and in some language pairs, but it would really be very good if we could use such a blend of translation memory and machine translation, and plus our own input, of course, because nothing can really substitute a human being in this process.
Right, and I actually think also, and for those who are really interested, like we all are, of course, in the in the bottom line, the financial bottom line, I think that if we find really clever ways of doing that, we would be more efficient going about it that way than if we would be post-editing not particularly good machine translation output. That's very time consuming also. Again, if you have that, there are extremely well-trained engines, and for those situations, it might indeed make a lot of sense just to post-edit. And in many cases, you don't need much post-editing for, simple sentences, etc. But if you have more complex text, if you have a language combination that might not be as well suited, or if you don't have those specifically well-trained engines, which most of us as translators don't have access to typically, then I think we will find much more productive and satisfying solutions by looking at those combinations.
Yeah, I agree. Now let's talk about CAT tools. First of all, you have written a lot about different CAT tools. Which program do you personally like best, and do you prefer to use for your translations? Which would you recommend for startup translators?
So, truth is I use a great variety of CAT tools. I, in fact, often look for jobs with CAT tools that I haven't used in a productive settings, just to get an idea of how those CAT tools work in a truly productive environment. Traditionally I have used Déjà Vu because I have a long relationship with both Emilio and Daniel Benito, who, the people who behind Déjà Vu, and I've written all the documentation for them, so I'm very familiar with them. So I often use Déjà Vu, but truth is I do also use a lot of other tools. And what I don't typically recommend is like an easier tool for beginners. I think beginners should choose the tool that helps them, and there is no simpler tool or easier tool that I would recommend over a more complex tool. I think that's not the right way of going about it. I think it's totally okay to change tools if you in your translation career, or to maybe have several tools, which I think is the case for many of us. But I would not say, well, let's start with XYZ and then later on you can go to ABC. I would say that beginners should choose the tool that they could also imagine to be using 10 or 15 years from now. And I think if you choose a tool, what you need to do is maybe actually not so much look at the tool, but at your environment. You need to look at, obviously, the clients you're working for. Do they ask you to use certain tools? And if so, is it possible still to use other tools? Sometimes clients would say, I want you to use WordFast or Tradus or MemoQ, but is it possible to still use a third-party tool that is also able to convert the Tradus or WordFast and MemoQ files into something else? And so that's the first question that I would ask. Then the next question would be, what do the people use that you work closely with? So you want support not just from the official support that SDL or Kilgray or WordFast provides, but you also want support from your peers. So if your peers all use a certain tool, that's a pretty good indication you should use that tool as well, because they have had good experiences with it, but also because they are the ones who are going to give you support. And only then, I think, after you answer those two questions, then you should look at, well, what tools are there? What tools? What do the tools do that my peers are using and that my clients are using? And then you should make a decision for a tool, I think. I think there are some of the tools are quite amazing. I think that tools like MemoQ, like Omega T, like Tradus, like Déjà Vu, some of the new web-based tools like WordBee or XTM or MemSource are amazingly powerful and are, to different degrees, constantly evolving. If you look at MemoQ, for instance, they are constantly evolving and constantly adding new features. If you look at Tradus, because of the Open Exchange app store, they are constantly evolving by having third-party developers develop solutions for them that take care of certain aspects of processing, of translation. Omega T is an open source tool that has new releases every other week with sometimes new and really interesting features. So there's a lot of different kinds of tools that are worthwhile to look at. And, as Olga, you well know, if you are well situated and have worked for a while, you will end up with several tools on your desktop anyway. You won't just have one tool. You'll have a number of tools. Some of them might be supplied by the client. Some of them might be free to start with, and some of them you might have to purchase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a chance to work with the first Russian cat tool? It's called Smartcat.
I haven't worked with it, but I've had a number of talks with Abby about it, and I think it's really interesting. It's not the first Russian cat tool, by the way. There have been a number of Russian cat tools, not particularly well, I shouldn't say not successful, but they're probably not as much on people's minds as other tools, but there have been some interesting cat tools from Russia, I think. But Smartcat probably has the potential of becoming a tool that people will be talking about quite a bit, I think. I think they've had a few problems to kind of get going. They, had a number of release dates that they had to then, postpone and stuff. But it's a very interesting tool, and I think the reason why it's particularly interesting is because of its pricing strategy. It's free for translators, and because they are able to use some of Abby's core strength with OCR, optical character recognition, and integrate that right into their cat tool. So they, are therefore able to easily process image files and probably use the best conversion solution for PDF files. And, that's just part of their cat tool. So that's really interesting. I think one thing that they will have to, that will not be particularly easy for them, it's a web-based tool. And like any other web-based tool vendor, there's still a certain hump to take for companies who use cloud-based solutions. We're not particularly progressive as an industry when it comes to accepting solutions like that, and the cloud-based concept has not really taken hold, I think. But it will, and so it might be just the right time for them to launch it now and to do quite well. I think they could do very well, but we'll see.
Why do you think are the cloud-based tools, not so popular so far?
Well, for some reasons are really good and some are not so good, I think. The reason that is really good that they're not popular, one of the hesitations that translators have, which is understandable and I understand, I get, is that we work for a large variety of clients, and many of our clients are very concerned about privacy. And many of our clients have very strict guidelines of where texts can be located. And some of our clients have, very strict regulations that none of the texts can be sitting in company external servers, which, excludes the clouds. So that from that perspective, there is great. There are good reasons to not be skeptical with cloud-based solutions. The other reason, is just a kind of a nebulous skepticism about cloud-based technologies in general, and that I don't quite support as much. I don't understand that we have to be so nebulous about it. I mean, we all use Gmail in some way or the other, or Yahoo Mail or Hotmail, and that's also cloud-based, and the attachments that our clients send us end up on those servers also. So we're not quite, I think, we need to be more clear in what our problems with it are and why we have those problems. Again, some of those problems I think are understandable, and I see where those concerns come from. Like the clients say, we cannot have that stuff sitting on the clouds and on the cloud, and we have to find solutions for that. Others are not quite so, acceptable, I think, as concerns.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I also thought about this privacy problem and confidentiality, which it's of primary importance to all translators, I think, in our work.
Of course it is. I mean, that's we need to take our clients very, very serious. And if the client says no, then it's no. I mean, there is no way for us to argue that. There is no way to say, well, but, no, but. I mean, if the client says that's the way it is, then that's the way it is in that particular case. I mean, there's other things where we can argue with the client, but not on those matters, I think.
Yeah.
But I think that many of the clients who now argue, who now say that you may not store anything on external servers, I think there'll be a change with those clients as well, and there have been already changes. I mean, so a couple of years ago, many clients who now say it's okay would have also said, that's not possible with our document. So obviously the whole world is sort of moving into the cloud, and so will our clients also more and more, I think.
Yeah. Well, speaking about CAT tools, what is very interesting for me is that, the reason why Tradus is so popular, because a lot of translators, translation companies, and large corporate clients ask for Tradus. They prefer to work in Tradus or to have others work in Tradus for them. So why is that? What is the reason?
Well, I think they're both historical and technological reasons. Historically, Tradus, as you know, had a quasi-monopoly on translation technology, and that has changed. It's not a monopoly anymore. There are many more interesting possibilities out there. It's still the market leader, and partly for good reason. They have technology that is quite powerful, and also technology that caters to the different groups within our industry. So, if you oversimplify it, it will be, there's the translation buyer, and then there's the LSP, and then there's the translator. And I think all of those three groups find their needs met to some degree in SDL translation technology, which is Tradus, but also, World Server and the other SDL solutions. So, I think those are two reasons that Tradus still is quite dominant. And I think, if you have a production chain like we do, it takes a lot of effort to change the technology that the production chain is using, because if one part changes, all other parts have to change it as well. So that it's not like that, you decide you've always bought BMWs and now you want to buy a Mercedes. You just do that, right? I mean, that's just you who makes that decision. But when it comes to something that others rely on you as well for, also as it is in the case of technology that you are using to cater to their needs, then it's a much more slower process to change things. And I think it's if I look at the changes that have happened in the last, really, I think since Tradus Studio came out in 2009, there have been, so it's been 5 years now, there have been a good number of changes, and the monopoly of Tradus, I think, is broken for good. And that's a good thing. It's good for Tradus, and it's good for other tools as well. Monopolies are not helpful for anyone.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, Tradus never officially was a monopoly, but it was a quasi-monopoly, and I have nothing against Tradus, and like I said, it's a technologically very good solution. But I do have something against a market where one technology really dominates and has the ability to essentially dictate what's happening in the industry. And I think that's not the case anymore.
Yeah. And I know that you even initiated a campaign for gathering ideas for CAD developers. Is that right?
Well, we in last January I did a couple of webinars where in one webinar we had lots of participants where we collected ideas and it was specifically focused on translators, what translators would like to see in CAD tools that they don't see right now. And so we collected a good number of things, and I sent those on to the CAD tool developers and asked for their response to that. And they sent responses, and they, and quite a few actually promised, that's, for specific suggestions that, yes, that will be a good suggestion and we're going to work on that and you're going to see that in the next 6 months or a year within our tool. So that was really positive. And others, were of course not quite so positive. They were all positive in their responses. Not all of them say, we're going to do that for sure. But what some did say, and that was really surprising, some did say, well, we actually have that feature and nobody knows about it.
Really?
Well, so that was good. That was good also that now we know about it. So that was interesting. And we, I just this morning, in fact, I talked to the person who organized the webinars, and we're going to continue that. We're going to have a webinar again next January where we're going to revisit what those promises, what has become of those promises, and where we are and what new has happened possibly in our industry and in technology that would require maybe new ideas that could be brought to the developers. Interestingly, one big area of concern for the participants in the webinar was voice recognition. Voice recognition has been used for a very long time in the industry, as for any industry, I think, that's doing a lot of data entry. But often the ability to use voice recognition within CAD tools is not particularly strong. And so many translators wanted to see a much stronger integration of voice recognition within CAD tools. That was one big area. Another area was, of course, machine translation and, general user friendliness of tools. And there were a number of other areas also. And if you or if anyone is interested who's listening to this wants to see all the different suggestions and the responses from all the CAD tool vendors, they can just send me an email and I will send them that. I compiled it all into a big Excel spreadsheet, and so I'd be happy to share that.
I do. Okay, I will send you an email. Yeah, that would be great, because it's really very interesting to see what people think. And, just to see the trends, what's going on in the minds of people, and because it also speaks a lot about the basic development in the industry. It's very interesting.
And I think what's also interesting to see, and that's important for me that people realize that, is that there's actually a really great willingness on the side of tool developers to listen to their constituencies. And I think what was a good opportunity in what this effort really represented to the developers was an opportunity to look beyond their immediate constituency. So the immediate constituency are the existing customers, right? And they have certain requirements or wishes, and the tool developers might or might not respond to those wishes. But this was an opportunity to look at all the potential constituency, meaning that all the potential customers who are not using it right now, who do not talk to those developers, but they suddenly had a voice that they wanted to be heard, and those requirements or wishes were communicated to the developers, who all responded very positively. And I think that we also have not helped ourselves sometimes to not particularly embrace or to not particularly trust the developers. And I think we're not well advised with that. We should really look to work with the developers to shape the technology into what it is, and we'll find that the developers are just as open to that as we are.
I see. Thank you very much. This is even more interesting than I thought it would be, especially given the fact that the companies were very, at least some companies were very positive about listening to the potential or real customers. It's really great. It's fantastic. And in the today's translation market, what we also hear more and more is about those programs that are called translation management systems, like XTRF, for example, right? They help both companies and individual freelancers to automate the translation process. Do you think it makes sense to use these solutions, especially for freelancers? Do you have your own personal favorites, maybe, among such programs?
Well, I know that both XTRF and Plunet, which are the two really big vendors there, are thinking about ways to market it to freelance translators. Also, I don't see an immediate need for those tools for freelance translators unless those, of course, it's sort of the line between freelance translators and LSP sometimes is a little nebulous, is not particularly well drawn. So many translators also farm out work to colleagues or to their peers. So once they do that, I guess they become an LSP, and so if you are a strict freelancer who only works on translation and do not share with colleagues, I'm not sure that you need a program like that. I think what you should have is some kind of a project management, billing, invoicing kind of tool, and there are a number of tools out there that do that, and that everybody is well advised to have something like that, I think. But as far as a very large solution like Plunet or XTRF, I don't think that's necessary. I'm ready to be convinced otherwise. They're very powerful both of them, and there's a couple of others, of course, beyond those two also. They're very powerful for language service providers who have, a great throughput of jobs and need ways to handle those jobs in a more uniform and more streamlined manner. And but for freelancers, I don't really think that's important. It's important for freelancers, I think, to have a really good organization of the jobs they are receiving and working on. They need to have a good overview of billing things, and they need to have structure as to what kind of prices for what kind of clients, etc. But you don't need a very, very large ERP-like solution like Plunet and XTRF are.
I see. Yeah. Well, now let's speak about conferences. We know that you take part in many, many international translation conferences. There is a wide variety of them now, but somehow, sometimes it feels that these conferences duplicate one another. So is it all about networking, or, is there really nothing new to say about translation business? Which conferences do you find more useful and more interesting for you?
So I think you're right when you say that conferences are about networking. They are about networking. It's important for, especially, and I'm talking from a translator's perspective now, for translators to go to conferences to build up strong networks of peers that, will support them in their work as translators, that will be good sounding boards, that will possibly help them to build virtual teams of translators for large jobs, etc. So that's a great value of conferences. I think you're absolutely right that there are ever more conferences, and if you look at the speakers of those conferences, very often you see that there's essentially very similar kind of speakers, if not the very same kind of speakers, and they often don't say particularly new things. But of course, that's an overgeneralization, and you do hear interesting things at conferences as well. So I think that what I found particularly interesting for me, but that's probably not something that can be generalized for everyone. What I found particularly interesting is to go to conferences in countries or in areas where there have not been many conferences before. So, for instance, it was thrilling, I think, to be at the Translation Forum Russia a couple of times, or it was thrilling to be at the Ukrainian conference a couple of years ago. Because those were conferences where nothing like that had ever happened in that area. Or I'm going to go to a conference in Czech Republic in September. I'm looking forward to it because, again, it's there's great excitement, and the excitement that the participants have then also reflects on the speakers, and maybe new things will come up in conferences like that. I think it's more likely to have interesting results come out from conferences like that than from the conferences that always happen on a regular basis, which doesn't mean that conferences like the FIT conference, the FIT conference in Berlin just last week or a couple of weeks ago, which I didn't go to, but I'm sure it was a fantastic conference, and lots of really important things were said there, and lots of great contacts were made. Or the ATA conference that I'm typically going to this year, it's going to be in Chicago. Those are also very important conferences, and large conferences between 1,500 and 2,000 people, so I think you should have a mix of conferences to go to. Typically, of course, you cannot go to 6 or 7 conferences a year because it's expensive. But so if I would advise somebody to as far as conferences, I would choose one large conference like the ATA or like whatever is in your area that you live in, and then one conference maybe of your either regional translation group or a conference in, like I mentioned, with Translation Forum Russia or the Ukrainian conference, or those kind of new and exciting conferences. That's what I would say. Of course, there's also the localization world and gala conferences, but those really are more geared towards the language service provider, and they have a different kind of importance for those folks. But yeah, I think that I've actually I've gone to a lot fewer conferences in the last few years than I used to go to, I live in the US, and my family is still in Germany. My dad's very sick right now, and so I'm trying to go to more conferences in Europe to be able to see my dad, and that's part of the reason why I'm in Europe so much right now.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that about your dad.
Thank you.
Family is the most important thing in the world.
Oh, it is, and it always sounds it sounds interesting when you live in another country than you grew up in, which of course is true for many translators. But it's hard, it's hard to be away from family, and especially when so I'm 50 now. My family, it's my parents are in the 70s, and that's the age where things are happening and where health is not so good anymore, and so that's difficult.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, speaking about translation industry, and just to sum up our interview, Well, it's clear to everybody that translation and localization industry is going through some very drastic changes now, and some of those changes are happening very quickly. And where do you see the industry in 10 years from now? Well, or if 10 years is too much, maybe 5 years from now. And where do you see yourself?
I think for the industry, as it were, there are really interesting changes ahead. And I think that what I think is interesting about those changes is that we are, I think, going toward more diversification right now. I think that 10 years ago, an LSP could say, well, I'm offering translation into many languages. And that essentially was his calling card, and that's it. And that might have been good enough, but I think that's not good enough anymore today, because the concept of translation in the public's mind has changed quite a bit. What do you hear about in the media about translation? You hear about Google Translate, and you hear about all these Skype with their new automated interpretation and stuff, and you hear about those things. And so for us as language service providers, we have to become much better in explaining what we do, and by doing that, I think we'll find out that we are actually doing very different things from each other. So we have to actually find out who we are individually, not as a whole, but individually, what we're doing. And I've been talking a lot about stories. I think we have to find our stories of who we are and what kind of services we really want to provide. And I think in that lies a huge opportunity of providing very specialized services for very specialized clients, and I'm not talking about a niche or a boutique kind of business, but the typical LSP today and the typical translator does not compete with Lionbridge or SDL, and we don't want to compete with them because they are providing services that actually would not be very profitable to us. They are able to provide those services for the cost that they do because they have technological and manpower abilities that we are not able to provide. So we have to define ourselves more clearly as to who we are, and what that will result in, I think, will be a diversification. Those who can't define who they are, well, they shouldn't be here in the first place, because if you don't know who you are and if you don't know what kind of services you really want to offer and what you're good at, well, that's, what are you doing here to start with? But the majority of us sort of knows who we are, but we haven't actually put it into words, I think, very much. Or we haven't actually told our stories. And that's what we need to do, I think. And if we do that right, we are going to see a very rich, I think, landscape that what we used to call the industry, and we'll find out that there's actually a great variety of services that we offer. And that's why I'm struggling with the term industry. Industry sort of presupposes that there is a monolithic sort of landscape, and it's not. It's a very, very rich and diverse landscape of services and of things that we can do and offer. So I have no, and of course when the question about the future is asked, many people think about machine translation and all that. And, machine translation is going to play a role, but in no way a role that would, I think, have to worry us by any means. I think that there will be some changes in. So I think that what has happened recently is that an American company called Smartling has gotten a lot of outside investment, $60 million, and I think they will play a big role. For good or for worse. I mean, they are likely to challenge, SDL's role as a technology provider. That's going to happen. But, overall, I think that we are going towards a future that is quite right. But not a future where it's enough to say, I'm providing translation, but a future where it's, important to say, I am providing a service that I want to explain to you. Here's what it is, and then you explain it, and you explain it in a cogent and understandable way. We have been really bad about in the past. We've been very bad about. We're about communication in the translation industry, right? That's what we do. We communicate between languages, and terms like localization or or guilt or all the other terms that we've been using are not good terms. Localization is one of those terms, for instance, that everybody seems to understand because immediately you have a certain recognition of what it could be. You localize from one locale to another, but we are well advised, I think, to use language that clients understand. Our clients are really smart, but if we come up with new acronyms and new terms all the time that really are just internal to our own particular world, that's not going to help our clients to understand who we are. We need to talk in a language that our clients, in an intelligent language that our clients can understand, and I think that's really important. And we haven't done that very well in the past, but we will, and things will be better, I think, if we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, well, thank you very much for taking your time to answer all my questions.
Yeah, well, it was fun.
Yeah, and I forgot to say that we also have 2 more people here online listening to us, and maybe Andre from Alba Longa Translation Company also has some questions for you. Andre, do you have any questions?
No, I think that all the answers were rich, and the topics we discussed over the last hour is quite enough for this interview. Maybe if we have another questions for the Josts, we will organize another interview if we'll have the mutual agreement. Well, and
is not too tired already from answering all those questions.
Yeah. This was the second point I wanted to say.
All right.
Well, and I'm really appreciate just that you agreed to participate in this our first interview and to answer all the questions.
You're welcome.
It was very fun and very informative.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. It was insightful in many cases, and it was very informative. Thank you very much for taking your time.
You're very welcome, and it was I had fun talking to you.
All right. Well, thank you again, and have a great day.
You too.
Okay. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.